Looking better? Looking the same?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bipartisan Policy Center. For all those that are here that got up after the game last night, appreciate you being here. And also those who are joining us on the webcast. I'm Bill Hoagland. I'm here with the center, and I have the pleasure of working with a number of staff here on a broad array of issues, from fiscal policy to education to health care. And the subject that we want to discuss today touches upon just about every one of those policy issues. Some would say that this issue even includes just about every aspect of our lives, from the future of jobs, national and personal security, our health, the environment, literally to even how long we might live. I don't know if I agree with this gentleman, but indeed even President Putin has said that, has boldly declared that whoever masters AI will become the ruler of the world. Rather over the top. But some of you may have seen the Wall Street Journal special report devoted on the entire section this weekend to AI intelligence. Some of you may have seen that. The Economist magazine also this week focused on self-driving cars, the hype and limits of AI. As that article in The Economist concluded, and I agree, quote, "We need to separate justified excitement of AI from the opportunistic hyperbole." We propose here to have a frank, calm discussion about AI. There are many questions in my mind personally. I'm not an expert at all in this area, but will jobs disappear, or will AI create more jobs? And if it creates more jobs, will the workforce have the right skills to apply that technology going forward? Will AI make our financial system more efficient, increase worker productivity, and possibly increase our leisure time? And in the healthcare sector, will we be able to eliminate the estimated 25% waste that researchers just last week in JAMA estimated is in the system? Or could it create a widening of economic and racial disparities in the healthcare system? Finally, and very importantly to the Bipartisan Policy Center, we think this should be a bipartisan issue, but as we begin here at the BPC to labor in these vineyards, what is the role of government and public policy, if any, in promoting or maybe controlling AI? We are very honored today to have some of the real experts here with us, both from the private and the public sector, to share with us their thoughts on the future of AI and some of these questions. To kick it off, we want to welcome to the stage Dr. Lynn Parker, the Assistant Director of Artificial Intelligence at the White House Office of Science. She formerly was Director of Information Intelligence Systems at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Parker also co-led the development of a national AI R&D plan, which would address the role of government and policy in this field to make sure AI is safe, secure, and meets the ethic norms to the public. Dr. Parker, please join us up here along with Mark Walsh for what we call a fireside chat, though, of course, we don't have a fireside up here, but that's okay. Mark, besides being a very valued member of our board of directors here at BPC, is certainly no stranger to this subject. I think it is safe to say that Mark was an early mover in this technology. Today, he is the managing director of Ruxton Ventures, a venture capital fund that he created in 2002. And from 2015 to 2017, he served in the Obama administration as head of the Office of Investment and Innovation for the U.S. Small Business Administration. As I said, Mark's career has revolved around technology entrepreneurship. He was president of Genie General Electric's online service and a senior vice president and corporate officer of AOL. And while at AOL, he created and ran AOL Enterprise, its business-to-business divisions. So thank you both, and I turn it over to Mark to have your chat.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And due to the World Wide Web, which I helped supposedly invent, many of you are seeing this in places other than this wonderful room. And thanks, Bill, for that great introduction. Before I turn the mic over to Lynn to sort of start us off with some thoughts, and then we'll get into Q&A, just a couple of quick things to remind everybody. Please set your phasers on stun. For those of you who are too young to remember Star Trek, that means turn your phone into airplane mode. For those of you who remember Star Trek, you'll get the analogy. So we don't hear your ringtones, some of which are very inventive, but we don't want to hear your ringtones during our time together. And also, I just want to point out, Lynn, before we get started, a part of her background, she was a senior person at Oak Ridge National Laboratories in Tennessee. Go Volunteers. And I still have my radioactive dime, which they used to hand out. Back in the 60s, my parents took me to Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and they would actually irradiate a dime and put it in a little plastic case and give it to us kids as a memento. I still glow from the experience, so to speak. But it's interesting to think, we were touching earlier, you and I in a conversation downstairs, about how AI kind of reminds me of atomic energy, that back in the late 50s and early 60s, it was the promise of the future. Obviously had a downside with weapons, but the prospect of universal energy at no cost to everybody was entrancing. And then this balance between opportunity and threat that that the atom represented, and Oak Ridge was such an amazing national example of. To me, there's some evocative elements of what we're hearing now about these two letters AI. So with that as précis, I'll turn the mic over to you, get started, and then you and I have some Q&A. And I just want to finish up with this. I expect some questions from the audience. We'll have about 10 minutes with that. I'll prepare you for Q&A before we get started. If there are no questions from the audience, I'm going to call on somebody, just so you know. So everybody be prepared. This is an interactive session, so we're going to have great interaction. That's going to happen. So Lynn, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. And thank all of you here at Bipartisan Policy Center for the opportunity to share some things that are happening in the nation as it relates to AI. So I was asked to give about 15 minutes of remarks. And so what I would like to do is to pose this morning one question. And that one question is, what do we need to do in order to ensure American leadership in artificial intelligence? Simple question. What do we do to ensure American leadership in artificial intelligence? So I believe that the President's executive order signed in February of this year, establishing the American AI Initiative, lays that strategy out very clearly. And what I'd like to do is to talk about some of those key pillars of the national strategy for AI to maintain America's leadership, and talk about some of the activities that the administration and the agencies have been pursuing in those areas. So the first principle is this, and I want to read directly from the executive order about research and development. It says the United States must drive technological breakthroughs in AI across the federal government, industry, and academia in order to promote scientific discovery, economic competitiveness, and national security. And the question is, how do we promote that technological innovation? Well, we've had a number of actions in the administration to pursue that. One, I don't know if you're familiar with how the budgetary process works in the federal government, but it is initiated with a memo, a budget priorities memo that comes from the Office of Management and Budget and Office of Science and Technology Policy that says to agencies what are the areas of R&D that should be prioritized as they prepare their upcoming budgets. And so AI, for the last 3 budget cycles, has been part of that memo, front and center, that we want to prioritize AI in the agency investments. But as agencies develop these investments, they also need to have some understanding of what the federal role is in AI R&D, given the fact that industry is investing significantly in all of these areas. And so, as was alluded to earlier, we created the National AI R&D Strategic Plan, the 2019 update, that lays out what are the areas of R&D that the federal government should be investing in. Again, those areas that don't have market drivers necessarily for industry to pursue. So the agencies now, as they develop their programs, are following that plan. For instance, one of the new strategies in that plan is to have partnerships, centers, larger scale interactions even across agencies or between agencies and industry. And so NSF just recently announced, together with USDA, DOT, DHS, VA, a new program for centers and institutes in AI. And that's just one example of many. Like DOE has stood up a new AI technology office. So those are ways that the agencies are playing out this prioritization of AI. Another, people often like to say, well, how many dollars are you investing in AI? That's how we know if it's truly been prioritized, is if we can count the dollars. And so that's been a tough challenge, though. How do you count federal investments in AI? It's been something we've been talking about for a small number of years, but up until this year, we haven't had a good process for how to count federal investments in AI. So we, over the last many months, worked with the agencies to come up with a process through the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Program, or NIDRD program, to now have a way to count agency investments in AI R&D. So just recently, the NIDRD supplement to the President's FY 2020 budget came out, and for the first time lays out what those R&D investments are at the agencies. And so now this is a way, it gives us a baseline going forward of how we can account for how the agencies are investing in AI R&D going forward. So these are some of the areas that we're working to make sure that the agencies, regardless of how much their budget is, that AI is a high priority. Now, certainly, advancing AI R&D is not only about the cool ideas that industry and academia have, but it's also about the data. And a challenge, of course, is having more data and models available for AI R&D and testing. And so another action that's in the executive order that we've been acting on is what are those federal data sets that can further AI R&D and testing? So there was an RFI issued that asked the R&D community, the AI community, what data sets or the types of data sets would be most useful at the federal level to be made more available for AI R&D and testing. Now, we heard from industry and academia, the R&D community on that, but of course it's a challenge to actually make that data available. There are privacy concerns, there are security concerns. The data may just be in sort of a messy format, and so it's not discoverable. So there are a lot of challenges that need to be overcome in order to make data more available. And we want to do it in a secure way. And so it may not be making the data public, but it may be making it more available through some sort of secured trust or some sort. And so that's another area that we're active in terms of furthering AI R&D and testing. So a second question, the same question, what do we need to do to ensure America's leadership in AI? So beyond the R&D, there's education and workforce. Education and workforce is key for us to have people that can engage in this new era of the industries of the future that are being enabled by AI and other emerging technologies. And so, quoting again from the executive order, it says, the United States must train current and future generations of American workers with the skills to develop and apply AI technologies to prepare them for today's economy and the jobs of the future. So how does that play out? Well, we've been looking at this from the entire spectrum of learning, going from K through 12, where we have a federal STEM strategy for 5 years to help students learn more have computational literacy, to prioritizing fellowships and scholarships at the college level and graduate school level for those who want to be deep experts. But even more importantly is the need for opportunities for people to have reskilling. And so this has been a high priority of this administration, and we're leveraging the work of the administration as it relates to reskilling with the National Council for the American Worker and the Pledge to America's Workers. These are really partnerships with industry, where industry has pledged new training opportunities for people who want to learn the skills of today, but they don't want to go back to school at full time, but they want to be able to perhaps work and learn new skills. And the last count that I saw, over 350 companies have pledged more than 14 million new retraining, reskilling opportunities for workers who are interested in this area. And so this is one way of many that we need to allow everyone to engage in these jobs of the future. So it's this idea of lifelong learning. We don't want to have this idea that you go to school and then you're done. Because even if you're an expert in today's technologies, in 2 or 3 years, you're going to be out of date. And so we all need to develop a culture of constant relearning and lifelong learning. So what else does it take to ensure America's leadership in AI? Well, a third area that the executive order calls out is in the area of technical standards, AI technical standards. Now, this probably doesn't get as much attention, but it is critically important. The executive order says that the United States must drive development of appropriate technical standards and reduce barriers to the safe testing and deployment of AI technologies in order to enable the creation of new AI-related industries and the adoption of AI by today's industries. So what does that mean? Technical standards are standards that allow us to have interoperability of AI systems. It allows us to be able to measure things like performance and accuracy and robustness and trustworthiness. Without these kinds of technical standards, then on the one hand, we can say we want AI that is trustworthy, but on the other hand, we have no way of knowing how to achieve it because we don't know what's the standard for trustworthiness. So these technical standards are critically important, and working through the directive and the executive order, NIST recently issued a plan for the federal engagement in the development of technical standards for AI. And so this then helps us work together at the federal level to make sure that we're developing those standards that allow us to achieve the kind of AI systems that we all expect. Okay, so what else does it take to ensure America's leadership in AI? Another is trust and confidence. So, quoting from the executive order again, the United States must foster public trust and confidence in AI technologies and protect civil liberties, privacy, and American values and their application in order to fully realize the potential of AI technologies for the American people. We all agree on that, I think, for the most part. The question is, how do you implement trust and confidence? Well, one of the important ways that the administration is pursuing this is through a memo that is being developed by OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in close coordination with our Office of Science and Technology Policy. And this is a memo directed to agencies that suggests regulatory and non-regulatory principles for how you oversee the use of AI in the private sector. And so these will be establish some common principles, some predictability across agencies in terms of how they think about regulatory and non-regulatory approaches to the use of AI. It will be a risk-based approach, which the U.S. has had for many years, of thinking about AI as a unique, for each application domain, not AI as a single monolithic concept, but AI applied to particular applications. And some applications have more concerns than others. Some areas don't need a lot of approaches to how they're being used, but some of them do. And so this memo then, once it's crafted in draft form, will come out for public comment. And we encourage everyone to provide feedback on that memo so that we can get it right. And then it will, that feedback will be taken into account and a final memo will come out. And then after that, agencies will be directed to come up with their own plans for their own regulatory space for how they want to ensure the appropriate regulatory and non-regulatory approaches for AI within the user application domains that they have oversight in. So that's one of the areas that we're looking at, issues of trust and confidence. And very closely related to that is the issue of having an international environment that fosters acceptance and furthers the American AI innovation space. And so, quoting again from the executive order, it says the United States must promote an international environment that supports American AI research and innovation and opens markets for American AI industries. So we've been working in a lot of venues internationally, like the OECD, the G7, G20, and other international venues, to talk about what are those high-level principles that we, as the world, agree on as it relates to the use of AI. And so the U.S. was a very strong proponent and worked hard to develop the AI principles that we all agreed to back with the OECD back earlier this spring. And so that's kind of sets the high-level set of principles for the stewardship of trustworthy AI that we can now move forward into implementation. And so that's one of the areas that we're working on internationally. So just to wrap up, I've been focusing here on what are the main approaches that we should take in order to maintain American leadership in AI. But it's important to also recognize why it matters. It's not just about bragging rights to say, hey, we're the world leader, but there are deeper reasons. It's about helping us improve quality of life, helping us to improve economic competitiveness, helping us to improve national security. But even more deeply than that, again, quoting from the executive order, it says, continued American leadership in AI is of paramount importance to shaping the global evolution of AI in a manner that's consistent with our nation's values, policies, and priorities. And we know full well that some nations are developing AI in a way that's to control the citizens and looking at oversight of people in ways that we would never go along with. So that's another aspect of the challenge today. And the time is really now. The time is now, and we are coming together with partnerships across the federal level, with industry, academia, civil society, industry, and so forth. And those partnerships are critical for us making sure that we get this right. I think by working together, we can fully realize the potential of AI for the American people and make sure that we're creating AI that reflects our nation's values, policies, and priorities. So with that, I thank you all for the opportunity to provide this remarks, and I look forward to more conversation with you, Mark.
That was awesome. I think that's a real clarion call from the administration and from your specific perspective on what matters. So you anticipated every question I have, just so you know. But there are a couple of things I want to touch on before I get to the audience. And just as a time check, it'll be about 3 to 4 minutes before I reach out to you and maybe call on some of you to get started in the questioning. Pardon me. But two things that rang a bell for me. You obviously had a very significant career arc at the University of Tennessee system and higher ed. So we talked about your reskilling and all the terms that apply to that. What's your sense of the big state R1 universities, or really higher ed in general? What's your sense of how ready they are, or what kind of conversations you're having to make sure they're aware that the graduates of tomorrow are not going to have the career arc for graduates when I went to college and when you went to college and got your PhD? Where's your sense of their response and their flexibility on this?
I think certainly the top research universities are deeply aware of the importance of AI in general and importance of computation, maybe somewhat more broadly, to everyone. It's sort of computation is becoming the new math, and everyone needs to have some level of computation. I think the challenge right now at the academic level is coming up with the curricula that allow people to incorporate that into just any program of study that students want to pursue. Right now, I think the model is often you have computer science professors that are trying to teach this, but there's not the scale right now of faculty. You know, we have a shortage of faculty members as well because they can go to industry and make work on really interesting problems and also make higher salaries. Yeah. And so I think the universities, though, are now working through new models and new curricula of how to embed this sort of computational expertise for people who are studying across the board in many different, nearly every different program of study. Mm-hmm. At the same time, they need to make sure that we're training enough of the deep experts as well. Yeah. So I think certainly at the research universities, this is they're front and center and leading the way in many areas. I think it's important, though, to recognize that we need these kinds of opportunities for everyone. And so the community colleges also need to get involved, the K through 12, again, that pipeline of preparing people with that computational literacy so that they can enter these fields if they so choose later on. So it's a broad
it's funny
spectrum.
That the phrase that colleges often use, they want to send out men and women with critical thinking skills, right? We all heard that phrase all the time. I'm convinced there's going to be a new one, which is critical computational analysis skills. Not that you have to know code, but you have to understand how computational or how data will affect your every single day. So let me go to a second topic that you touched on, and that's trust and confidence. It's such a thin, shining, bright red line to citizens and industry and regulators and everybody when you cross it, or perceive to have crossed it. And I know we touched earlier on facial recognition, which is one of a million examples that can be kind of a flashpoint for trust and confidence. What's your sense of this administration and ongoing forward? Where are some of these issues going to continue to be flashpoints, and how do we address those concerns?
I think when you look at, again, there are many applications of AI that people don't stay awake at night worrying about, like using AI to track the marine life of an endangered species of some sort along the coast. I mean, for the most part, people don't worry that that's going to be misused in some sense. But there are AI applications where decisions are being made that affect people. It could be access to resources, or it could be some sort of punitive punishment of some sort as it relates maybe to just judicial sentencing. And so these kinds of use cases are important for us to get right. Now, it's critically important, though, as we have this conversation, to have an evidence-based approach. And I think a lot of times we are being reactionary. We see a negative in terms of what's possible with AI and presume that what's possible will necessarily happen. And we do need to make sure that we are thinking about what's actually happening, what the state of technology is, how the AI system is being used, the context of how it's being used, so that we have a reasonable evidence-based conversation about particular use cases. All AI is not the same, but for those use cases, we need to look at what we need to do maybe from the R&D perspective, or what tools are already out there, so that we can address these important and true concerns in many cases. But I think as the technology is developed and as the tools, we become aware of the pitfalls of some pieces of AI, we can then address them. So, some approaches you might consider are regulatory sandboxes that allow us to look at some of these tough use cases in a safe environment, so that now we can test, rather than saying just don't do it, we'll never learn from it, and that means we'll never be able to achieve some of the benefits of AI in those cases. But we can have an approach that allows us to try out some possibilities in a safe zone, and then learn from that until we've perfected the technology.
I mean, you could almost argue some other nations are almost sandboxes from us. You touched earlier on the idea of monitoring citizens in fashion that our nation doesn't consider appropriate, and I think you're going to see lessons learned from there, correct?
Yes. I mean, you hate to say that, you want to learn from examples of the use of AI that you don't agree with. And so
Right.
we would never advocate for using AI in ways that we don't agree with. On the other hand, there are ways that we can learn from use cases where we're not necessarily sure of what the right approach is. Again, but I think doing this in a responsible way through regulatory sandbox or other kinds of pilot projects is the way to learn, rather than learning from use cases that we don't agree with.
So final question, and again, clock warning to the crowd. I'm going to go Q&A in just a second for our guest. What's your sense of where progress from a regulatory and public-private partnership element goes from the state to the federal level? Where are you guys in interacting with specific states, or are there states that are sort of watching for the federal mandate and federal behavior to guide them, or somewhere in between?
I think it's somewhere in between. There are advantages to, in some cases, states trying things out locally. Because AI is so new, we don't necessarily know exactly what the right approach is. And these are approaches, in use cases perhaps that aren't going to really hurt people. They have a lot of oversight still. But because it's new, then you could argue that having top-down the federal decree that this is how it should all be done, if that happens too early, then you get it wrong and it's hard to change. Yeah. On the other hand, if it happens too late and you have a plethora of regulations and it hurts industry innovation, because now every state has, and local province or government, whatever, has something different, then that hurts innovation too. So there's an appropriate timing here.
Yeah.
We have to learn enough that we can find those approaches that will work well, but not waiting too late until we have a patchwork of regulations that squashes all of innovation.
Agreed. Lynn Parker. Okay, boys and girls, it's time for open mic night, as they say in the comedy club business. Fabulous guest, clearly at literally the tip of the spear of where these issues are going from the regulatory, investigative, investment, and public-private partnership world. Some thoughts or comments or questions for our guest? And we have mics moving around. So may I ask, when you start your question, start it with your name and any organization you choose to be affiliated with.
Jared Brown with the Future of Life Institute. You mentioned the U.S.'s support for the OECD AI principles, and one of the next steps for the OECD is to develop an AI policy observatory. I wonder if you could speak about the U.S. support for that initiative, how it might be funded going forward.
So for those of you who aren't aware, after the OECD AI principles have been agreed to by 42 nations, actually, all the OECD countries plus some others, it's important, of course, to address implementation, and we need to learn. Again, similar point that I just made, this is new enough that we need to learn. And so the OECD is setting up an AI policy observatory, which is where nations can share best practices, share policies that they have tried in the AI space, so that other nations then can learn from those policies and help us all move forward. Again, we're very much in a learning mode, I think, here internationally. And so certainly we're very supportive of the idea and the process of sharing information and going forward. How it is to be funded is something to be worked out down the road, but I think certainly the idea of working together internationally as partners to figure out how we can learn from each other and learn how to make good use of AI across the board is something that we do support.
We have time for two more questions, and I want to just make sure, please make it a question and not a lecture or a commercial. I know that the first one was a very good example. Let's get the mic down here in front for our next to last question.
Hi, my name is Hari Iyer. I'm the medical student fellow at the AMA, and we've taken an interest in AI. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about algorithmic bias as it relates to, for example, criminal justice use cases with Compass, and where you feed in maybe garbage data, and then you have a racially biased set of outcomes that come out. And if you could talk about what the administration is kind of considering to make sure that bias and training of some of these algorithms is mitigated.
So
it's a big one.
It is. It's an important issue, of course. I think when you think about bias, it's social bias in those kinds of applications, it's one instantiation of a broader class of challenges in machine learning in general. And the broader class of challenges is when you're applying machine learning to data, is the data that you're learning from representative of the use case? It plays out in bias. It also plays out in things like safety. Maybe you have a driverless car that's learning to move around the town, and if you trained it on data that doesn't match what it's going to experience on the road, then now you have a safety challenge. And so that broader challenge of how do you make sure your data is representative of the use case is one that requires some tools. There are tools in the very specific case of bias, tools that have now, because we're aware of the issue, now being developed that help us determine how close of a match is the data that you're trained the system on to the actual use case that you're looking at. So the development of those tools through R&D is a critically important aspect of the approach to make sure that we're, again, back to that evidence-based approach, that we're doing it based on evidence of how that is actually going to be used. But of course, another piece of it is the regulatory or non-regulatory approaches that I mentioned with the OIRA memo. And so that approach, as it will play out, will have the agencies consider particular use cases of AI, and bias will certainly be one of the issues that they'll be looking at in terms of, is there potential for bias in this particular use case? And if so, then how do you go about making sure that the industries who are developing tools have gone through the right series of steps in order to mitigate that bias? And again, this also comes back to technical standards. We need a way to measure what is bias. And so that's the important role of developing the AI technical standards as well. And then we also have to make sure that we're comparing these systems to the current state. And the current state is that people are making decisions, and often people are biased. And so we don't want to hold AI systems to an unreasonable level of perfection when we know that the AI systems can do better than the current state. So again, it comes back to evidence. What's the evidence that the AI system is performing better than a human system or worse than a human system? And so we need to have a very important cross-section view of all these issues.
Well, the old phrase was garbage in, garbage out. Now it's bias in and bias out, which I think some people tend to forget. We have time for one last pointed and quick question. Does anybody want to be? Let's go right here. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Hi there, Kate Prohaska at Discover Financial Services. Thanks so much for your comments and your work on this. I had a question just pertaining to regulators who don't fall into the budgetary process and OIRA and all of that. How are you interacting with those regulators, let's say like an independent CFPB or different things like that? And then also, when might we expect the memo from OIRA?
We do talk a lot with the independent agencies in the sense of making sure they're aware of what we're working on at the federal level for the agencies that have regulatory authorities. I think in practice, I'm not a regulator, but in my conversations with my OIRA colleagues, they say it's common practice, I think, for the independent regulatory agencies to also follow some of the same principles and to try to maintain that consistency. So certainly we're staying in communication to make sure that we understand what their challenges are, and as they play over into other regulatory agencies, that we can have some consistency there. So I think a lot of it is conversation. We don't have the ability, obviously we don't want to tell independent regulatory agencies, give them direction, but at the same time, I think there's a general, in the sense of being bipartisan and just kind of a general agreement that there are important approaches that we can work on that are collective regardless of how our regulatory system is set up. So that consistency, I think, through conversation and understanding of the issues is a key part of it.
Dr. Lynn Parker, everybody, please thank her for her special time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Wonderful job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic summary of what our administration is doing. We're going to now ask our panel to join me on stage, right? The three panelists with me. I'll move over to the side here. I think most of you have a piece of paper that represents in the audience, so you will know the full bio of everybody on the panel with me. So there should be few surprises as I walk through their names and their backgrounds, which I want to make sure I don't screw up here. Sorry. To my left is Suzanne Kent.
Suzanne.
Just testing you. Sorry.
That's who I am today, yes.
Suzanne Kent, you've probably never had that happen before. Suzanne Kent, I apologize. Who's the CIO of the OMB. So we have an actually fantastic kind of parallel, I think, from the way we started this morning off. Congratulations and welcome. Then we have Imad Rizk, who's Chairman and President and CEO of, God, why am I not having this company right here? Please tell me the name of the company.
Cotivity.
Yeah. Have you met Suzanne? I'll get
Hi, Suzanne. How are you?
Yeah, right on.
What do you do? No.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know. I don't know what company I work for.
And last, John Sarushian, who is with the Bipartisan Policy Center and heads up a lot of our initiatives on AIs, particularly in the financial services arena, but is here also can address sort of the broader perspective.
Oh, you got him right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, I think. But the key question is, who am I? I'm looking at my own. But anyway, you all heard kind of a fabulous tee-up from Dr. Parker's perspective on the administration's initiatives on this issue of AI. And I'm going to go ahead and just continue on the government side. What did you hear from Dr. Parker that affects your day-to-day, your ability and your management of your team as far as information? Because a CIO title is 20 years ago, no one knew what it meant. Now it's probably one of the most important C-suite titles, both in the corporate and the public sector, I would argue. So what did you hear from her that sort of affects your day-to-day, that rings a lot of bells in how you provide leadership for your group?
I'd love to share that. And let me start by sharing a little bit of a frame. First of all, Dr. Parker and I get to work together almost on a daily basis. But as the Federal Chief Information Officer, my role is actually to focus with across all of the CFO Act agencies and our federal agencies around how technology is used. So to develop policy for how we use technology inside federal agencies, and to provide oversight for the administration and members of Congress on how well we're doing in meeting those objectives. So I have the fabulous privilege of working across all the agencies and seeing not only what they're doing to accomplish mission and better serve citizens, but to understand what they're doing with technology and where those challenges are. So my role particular to AI, I'll make it really simple with the agencies, is the twofold responsibility of the agency. So first and foremost, how agencies use modern technology and data, and we are also responsible for the execution of the federal data strategy. So that's such an important part of AI, but how agencies use technology and data to better accomplish their mission and to improve the services that they deliver to citizens, and to do that in a way that is responsible use of taxpayer money. That's the internal part of the agency role and the areas where we work together in this topic. The second part is that the agencies have a responsibility for the external components. Many of the things you heard Dr. Parker talk about around making data available, responding to requests from industry, supporting research and development, whether that is in direct like grants or specific topic areas, or making data or facilities available to support those sets of activities. And those are the areas where we work very closely in execution of the strategy, because much of the work is actually done by and within the agencies. Many of those sandboxes that Dr. Parker talked about are in agencies. The places where we are putting a lot of discipline around the data and developing the ethical strategies for not only use of data, but the frameworks for the big problems that agencies want to accomplish, directly aligned to their mission. So on a day-to-day basis, in particularly the AI and across technology areas, my role focuses on helping agencies ensure they have the resources, they understand the administration priorities, and that with them we are helping develop policy and guidance and those measurement tools to ensure that we are advancing the ball both on their internal mission and their external mission.
Right. Great overview. We'll drill down more. Imad, what your corporation and your prior corporation in the merger focus on the healthcare industry.
Right.
Just a small part of our national economy, just a little teeny slice of what we think about every day. And as you said earlier, we were chatting earlier, and you talked about how complex the industry is, so to speak.
Right.
What are some challenges at the meta level that you see in the application of AI, augmented or artificial intelligence, machine learning, into the arena of health?
Well, great. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for saying AI and big data, because the two do go together. And I want to thank the BPC for having healthcare represented, because this is the right time for healthcare to be actually represented in AI. Although it's been around for a while, but this is the right time for healthcare to really leverage all of the AI tools that are out there. I also just wanted to reiterate something that Bill said. Think of one thing, that 25% of our expenditure right now in healthcare, which is $3.5 trillion, which is probably the fourth or largest economy in the world, and is unuseful or wasteful. When you think of 25% of everything that we do right now is wasteful. And so you start to say, okay, well, AI has been around for a while, and it's been leveraged in medicine before. It's been leveraged in pathology and imaging and in R&D mostly. But how do you take AI from the laboratory, kind of like the pharmaceutical industry, and take it into the real world? Now, normally in the pharmaceutical industry, if anyone's from that world, it takes about 9 years. And AI in healthcare has been around for about 9 to 10 years. So we're right at the application in healthcare, where we could begin from our perspective. The ecosystem in healthcare is a bit complex, like I said. The ecosystem has payers, which are the big, large insurers, and CMS. You have providers, which have been leveraging a great deal of AI and big data for a while. You have pharmaceutical companies, And then you're beginning right now a lot of the social determinants and the iWatches and all of that. The problem with data right now is all of those sit in separate applications and they do not speak to each other. So a question that was presented by the AMA is, algorithmic bias. Well, algorithmic bias is probably not going to occur as much if you have a good set of data that you use to make those decisions. But what you said, Dr. Parker, is right now, 25% of the expenditure we're getting wrong. Whether it's wrong medication, whether it's wrong diagnoses, whether we're not intervening into gaps of care, diabetics that are not getting the appropriate medicine, or CHF patients that are being readmitted over and over again. So right now, because of the adjunct of EHR and EMRs and the beginning of interoperability, which actually got started here, we are seeing that this is the right time for AI to begin to really help us get to that next level and hit. It's about $1 trillion. That was the JAMA article that was published last week. It's about $1 trillion of waste of medicine that is causing harm onto our citizens.
$1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Pretty soon we're talking about real money, as
it
they
is.
used to say.
It is.
So, John, the blend between the healthcare arena, gazillions and gazillions of dollars, be it wasteful or potentially used for higher purposes, and the financial services arena that I know you focus on a lot here at the BPC. There's a lot of overlap, but what are some of the things you've heard this morning or that you're focusing on that you see as indicators of where AI is or can take us?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence has been sort of affecting the financial services industry quite a bit. And what sort of got us onto artificial intelligence was a task force that Mark actually was one of the co-chairs for, called the Task Force on Main Street Finance here at the Bipartisan Policy Center, where we were trying to figure out how the financial system can better serve Main Street, whether it's small businesses, entrepreneurs, consumers, you name it. And we kept on coming on this issue of data and technology. Artificial intelligence needs data, and it's a form of technology. So we kept seeing AI pop up as part of our discussion about data and technology. And we saw a lot of everyday financial service type activity where AI was either being used or had a lot of potential. So think, I presume almost everyone here has a credit card. Credit card fraud is a big issue that financial services companies have to deal with. And AI techniques, the more advanced they get, the better they'll be able to be at detecting credit card fraud. So you'll have to, as a bank, you spend less money on detecting credit card fraud. Your customers are happier if the AI techniques get more and more advanced. So as a result of this task force, we started to look into this issue of artificial in finance generally, looking at some of the different areas, whether it's in the banking space, insurance space, asset management space, where artificial intelligence can be used. And there were a lot of applications, again, either currently being used or there's a lot of potential for. So we got into this space, and as many of you might know, the policymaking arena has started looking into artificial intelligence in the financial services space. The House Financial Services Committee has set up a task force on artificial intelligence. Congressman Bill Foster will actually be here later to hopefully talk a bit more about that. The different regulatory agencies have been looking into AI, seeing if their guidances and regulations need to be updated, trying to better understand the technology. And we thought this would be a great space for the Bipartisan Policy Center to get into, try to keep the discussion thoughtful, not overreacting to things, putting in place ideas and thought pieces to try to make sure when policymakers try to react, they'll do it in a measured and level-headed manner.
Well, let's drill down. Suzette, as a C-level executive in a pretty large organization called the federal government, I'm sure you're conscious of other nations and some of the things that they're doing or maybe hiding from us or whatever. China certainly, we heard Bill's intro, that Vladimir Putin said whoever controls AI controls the world or something sort of scary like that. What's your sense of other nations, particularly China, in how they're gathering and managing AI in the CIO job at their level?
It's a very important question, and I'll go back to some of the framing that Dr. Parker started with, and the way in which we use the technology is deeply rooted in the information that's available. Mm-hmm. And our intent is to align that with the principles and the values of American people. And we know in some spaces that the use of the technology and data reflects principles and values of others. Some of the areas where we really see impact, and this was also part of another strategy, the National Cybersecurity Strategy. We see things happening in the cybersecurity space that are leveraging artificial intelligence and leveraging it, in a way that has created a different defensive posture. And you heard an example, in financial services, when you talk about the value of information, information theft is very critical. And in the space, whether our intent is to use the technologies to improve what we deliver to citizens and improve quality of life, national security, and to support the economy, in doing those things, that sometimes puts us in conflict with others who are going after some of those same economic benefits. I do know that whether it's through OECD or some of the other international groups that we've had fantastic discussions with other like-minded nations around use of this technology. And you mentioned state and local governments. They're doing interesting things in smart cities. Some of the other countries are also making very interesting investments in how they use this set of technologies and the data that is available inside their government to improve services. And those are dialogues that we continue to stay involved with. Some of them are reflective of the size and scale of those nations. But the perspectives are things that we can learn from, and the scale in which we operate and the security and the prosperity that we have to protect creates a different equation for us.
It's funny, when I worked with the federal government, I went to Estonia. Fascinating example.
Yep.
For those of you who don't think about this, Estonia, I would argue, one of the most digitally sophisticated nations on the planet, certainly in Europe. And that's probably an example that most people don't think of, where you and your teammates can learn from some of the opportunities that they provided for their citizenry and some of the challenges that it represents, right?
No, absolutely. And I've actually talked to the leader at OECD, the leader from Estonia, Denmark, Singapore, some of the things that they have done around digital delivery of services create a different operational environment. So you look at things like they didn't have paper in the financial services industry. They approach national identity in a different manner. Their services are consumed in a way that is substantially more digital. So, that changed the operating environment. They also have a different type of acceptance of some of those digital services, in their environments. They also have a very different geography. One of the stories they shared with me, I was asking about adoption in a certain population in one of the countries, and they literally shared with me, well, we bought everyone in that population an iPad. And that was very interesting. So the economics of doing that in the United States is a different kind of challenge.
They're the same way actually in healthcare.
Yep.
Yeah.
Most of them are over 90 to 95% completely electronic healthcare.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that they have that's a pretty significant advantage. The second thing is that they have, just like you said about the iPad, they have a single patient identifier.
Right.
So Imad Rizik is Imad Rizik. You have everything. So all the data that comes from, whether it's government, whether it's the private sector, or whether it's a watch, it all trickles and feeds into one single patient identifier into a longitudinal record.
Yeah,
which is something we don't have at this point.
By the way, Suzette, if you decide to do the iPad thing, can you call me first so I can buy it? Just to make sure I know that the earnings forecast for Apple is improved.
You'll become augmented.
Yeah, right. And also, just a short piece of reaction with the Singapore thing. Public caning is hopefully not in your future of interacting with data. But I digress. But the idea of having...
Yeah, I have to say one thing. Singapore has lifelong learning. They have a commitment to lifelong learning. So when we talk about, that's a great example of one of the countries when we were examining progress in reskilling and continuous investment. That is a hallmark of some of the things that they do. So their challenges were very different. It's again a great reason to continue our dialogues with others to understand how they're solving those same challenges. Sometimes things we can use and others that we might could apply differently.
My son just moved to Singapore. It's such you get such a window, an amazing window when you see from a citizen's perspective who you know well, like your spawn, what it means to be a resident of that place and others. Well, so Imad, you touched on it a little bit, I think, in your addition to Suzette's comments. You know, I come from the technology industry, and we always wanted to find an OS, right? An operating system was sort of the platform that other applications would be built upon. And it sounds like you really, in some ways, both wish for but see some challenges of having a medical OS. Because you mentioned about how data silos are completely incompatible and legally often not able to be joined together. Wave a magic wand for me. If you and your colleagues at your company, or if you could magically make regulators think a certain way, what are some of the visions that you might see in this sort of OS idea of healthcare?
That's a great question, and we've been talking about it actually here for over a decade. So think of data that is financial and clinical. Just to simplify it, the financial data is the claims data. So when you go to a doctor, they submit a claim. The clinical data is really the result of that. So when you look at a payer, like either it's a CMS or a private payer, they know that you had a chest x-ray, but they do not know the result of that chest x-ray, whether it's a pneumonia, whether it's a bronchitis, they just don't know. Those two sit in completely different silos. Now think of a large healthcare system that uses one provider of technology, an OS system, and they merged with another one, and that one uses another OS system. Those two systems do not talk to each other. So you have two layers of incompatibility. One of them is at the provider level, not all of the providers are interoperating with each other across the continuum of care. So hospitals, outpatient centers, surgical centers, and then you also have the financial data in the payers that are administrating this, not sharing the data and bringing it together. So if I had this kind of one wand, would be probably three things in a practical way. Number one would continue, we've made a lot of movement, but continue to push regulation around interoperability across both financial and clinical, and make it just a state of affairs. And we have now the technology. So in the old days, you used to say it would be very expensive for me to get another whole operating system. But now we have clouds. We have so many things that could interoperate. That's why I say AI right now is the perfect time, because cost is no longer a prohibitor. It's actually, you could begin to connect in the cloud and all of these things that you can do. So that's number one. Number two, we probably need to revisit some of the HIPAA laws. I think the last time we revisited them was 1996, and some of them, we've made some advances since then, and they're a bit antiquated, and we need to update them and move forward. And then the second thing is the last thing is the public and private sector have to work together. This is not just a bipartisan effect, but it's also a public and private. It's a large industry. It's $3.5 trillion. It's going to become $6 trillion over the next 5 years. I think it's a national security issue if we have patients that are walking around undiagnosed diabetics, undiagnosed, falling with a heart attack and not being seen. And you have almost, think of an industry that would have 25% of waste and an impact on what that would create in any of us. So if I had that magic wand, I would kind of create, we have the technology right now to create interoperability, begin putting financial and clinical data. That will decrease the algorithmic bias. That will give us a great deal more of precision medicine. Make sure that we just appropriately look at the HIPAA rules and have public and private work together.
So John, in that analogy, silos and your thing of the chest X-ray and how what A and B don't know the outcome of the X-ray. What are some examples in financial services that you think both scare consumers, but would be helpful to providers in financial services arena, and that whole sort of redlining and all of the bias elements that come into this conversation?
Yeah, so as part of sort of the work we've been doing on this issue, we've talked to many people in the industry space, but also consumer space, academics, government officials, and challenges that often get raised are algorithmic bias. Will the AI be biased against a certain protected class? Privacy, what data is being used, what should be used, what the laws surrounding that should be. explainability. Can this AI be explained? So in financial services, if you deny someone credit, you have to give them a reason for denying credit. With AI, you have to figure out a way to sort of explain how it made its decision to the average person. Certain consumer protection rules. So there are bad actors using AI to sort of defraud people. There needs to be consumer protections to sort of protect against that, but there's also potential for AI to be used by regulators to catch these bad actors. So these are some of the various issues that have come up throughout my discussion. Data, how to sort of use it, where to get it from becomes a big issue. So when we talk about silos, it's often who does a financial institution partner with to get data, or does it use its own data? That becomes a big issue there. Then there's a whole entire issue of sort of what should the private sector do, what should the public sector do, what sort of public-private partnership should be there. I know a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the regulatory agencies are looking at this issue. The House Financial Services Committee is looking at this issue. And a lot of people in industry are trying to sort of present their view. Consumer groups are trying to understand these issues pretty quickly, given sort of the fast pace of technology and innovation. So yeah, there's a lot to be done. Public, private, partnerships will be important. Public and private sector will have to do their own thing, and sort of getting the right mix of, busting silos, but also doing it in a responsible manner will be very important.
So Suzette, I bequeathed a magic wand to Emad for a short period of time. I now am going to wrest it from his grip and bequeath it to you. If you could wave a magic wand, what are some ways that you would, to be blunt, hope the private sector sort of aligns itself with the natural goals of our federal government or regulation in general?
I'm going to answer this in a little bit different way.
Okay.
And he kind of touched on one of the things, starting with financial services, and I'll use a financial services example. The magic wand is how do we create trust?
Yeah.
And how do we use the technology capabilities in a way that our citizens feel is improving their quality of life? And use the simple financial services example. People get very excited, when fraud is detected and I heard somebody from Discover, the card is used, in the Caribbean, and you're sitting in rainy Washington, D.C., and they call and say, hey, there's some fraud going on. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
You probably don't think about what's going on in the background. But if they called and said, why are you shopping here? Haven't you spent enough today? On your Christmas, something like that, that's intrusive. It is important to build trust, and you heard Iman and others talk about, or earlier today too, talking about use of data. If I had, the magic wand, we would understand clearly how we build that trust and how we make available the powerful data that are strategic assets of the federal government on behalf of its citizens. I get really excited when I'm working with HHS and they're able to look at data in one of our lab environments and actually improve early diagnosis.
Yeah.
I get very excited when agencies agree to share data, and that is, any of you who work with the agencies know that is not an easy thing right now. When they share data, and there were some examples with first responders, and we're able to be more proactive to save lives. Those are the things that are exciting. And so if I had a magic wand, we could translate what trust means into the mechanisms for harnessing the data and making it available to solve those really tough, complex questions that are about, while protecting civil liberties, they are about improving quality of life, national security, and economic prosperity across all of our industries. Lynn gave an example. We had lots of replies to the RFI on what data would you like to have. About 30% of that was from the medical industry.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more that we could do. And unleashing that, unharnessing, and doing it in a way that aligns with our values and builds trust of citizens, that's what my my magic wand would be for.
I am shocked and saddened to hear that agencies don't share data. I have never heard that in the federal government. John, did you want to add on to something to this?
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to emphasize the importance of trust, as Suzette mentioned. It's very important to get that right. And also, Suzette mentioned, I keep going back to this detecting credit card fraud example. A lot of the benefits of AI happen behind the scenes, so people don't know about it. And that's unfortunate, because there's often discussion about the challenges, and we need to get the challenges right, but we also need to tell the stories of the benefits, especially when they're hidden.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we think of, we're worried about sort of security and we're worried about trust but right now, I mean, the status quo is people have silos of data and they're leveraging that data for their own purpose. Yep. And if you kind of create a transparency across that data, you would think that that should add more trust, because you're now, the providers are getting the information that's retrospective, they're seeing the history of the patient versus not. I mean, you're saying some of the HIPAA rules where you can't share data from one physician to another, but that's relevant. Mm-hmm. That's relevant to be able to make a decision on the outcome of that patient. So again, just like Dr. Parker said, look at the status quo. We're allowed right now to not share data, and that should create a lack of trust, because we should be able to share data in a secure fashion.
Well, earlier today we heard from I think he's in the room, a person from Google who said, humans are inherently biased. And we sort of, we're so afraid of algorithmic bias and use of data, and we sort of pretend to forget that every single day, every one of us, in all sorts of ways, make our own algorithmic bias in how we make decisions. I mean, there's the famous joke of the guy applying for a loan and the banker says, no, just something about your face just pisses me off, right? I mean, there's millions of examples of this. And I sometimes wonder why the collision between what we know happens in the real world and the fear of what could get better with some of the tools and tactics we're talking about today. I don't think you're all psychologists, but it is interesting to me that we as citizens, perhaps, and sometimes legislative folks, regulators, elected officials, whatever, we don't see the beauty of the future because we choose to ignore the reality of the present. And I'm not sure where this will play out, but I think financial services might be the beginning of where this starts to kick in. You agree?
Yeah, it very well could be. And a comment actually on the psychology behind it. One thing I've noticed is, and I was guilty of this myself, when it comes to computers, and I think this is why we have a different standard for it relative to sort of humans, we think that there will be no bias unless it's deliberately hard-coded in sort of the programming language. But in reality, it's not just if it's hard-coded, the data that's fed to train the AI algorithm could also introduce bias. So I think the thing is with computers, we think, it's by default not biased. So if we learn of some bias, we suddenly are so shocked that we don't compare it to human bias, we compare it to the perfect ideal scenario, which I think is what's ingrained in people's heads. That's at least my theory. Happy to hear if the other panelists have a different theory.
Mark, I think when you look at things that have been accomplished in the industry, and when I look across many of the agencies in the federal government, I do think in the geospatial space, we've seen a large degree of success in not only collecting and sharing information, but making it accessible to industry. Many public-private partnerships that have been very successful. Hundreds of thousands of jobs created, trillion-dollar industry where federal information is provided, and industry consumes that information to create exciting new products, services, and apps. And as I've examined that, it is a type of data where the trust equation is much more simple. Mm-hmm. It's not, about personal behavior, personal information, or those types of things. And we've been really successful. So, that's an area where we can look at successes and then determine, what are some of those practices that we can replicate as we tackle the challenges with some of the other types of data.
I think that's a great point. I mean, people forget 60 or more percent of the technology that enables this thing that we all carry was government research, SBIR grants, et cetera, from my old world. And I used to work at AOL and Genie. Remember CompuServe, Prodigy, AOL, and Genie? They were silos. You could only send email from one AOL person to another AOL person with your AOL address. And then something called the internet came along and basically leveled the ability to communicate between these silos of online services. And the internet, of course, was a DARPA, a federal government project. So your analogy of, hey, the government's done a lot of great stuff in tech, or in enabling,
Yes.
in funding, enabling, and then deploying technology. And some of you may know Todd Park, who used to be the CTO of the National Weather Service, and he used to talk about how enabling the data the government gathered on weather.
Yes.
I mean, all of us, I guess many brought umbrellas today based upon the data that the federal government made and enabled to be usable by private sector partners that we now depend upon. So I think that's a fabulous point. I'm going to give you another warning for Q&A, and I will call on somebody, but this looks like a pretty active crowd from the prior experience with Dr. Parker. Q&A in just a minute, but let me pose one last semi-magic wandish question, and I'll start with you, John. If there's one press release or breathless press story that talks about the bad side of AI that you wish you could eradicate from your arena and not see again, what would that headline or that press release be?
That's a good question. So one of the things that I often hear about is the jobs issue, and I think it's a very important issue. Make sure the future of work is something that's sustainable. I worry that sometimes the debate gets sensationalized more than it should be. So when it comes to future jobs, AI will probably automate certain jobs, destroy certain jobs. It will also, though, probably create certain jobs or change certain jobs how they are. So in terms of the actual concerns and the legitimate things I think policymakers should be thinking about are, how are we going to handle the transition? So someone's job who's automated, what are we going to do to reskill them, retrain them? And two, what will be the types of jobs that will be created as a result of artificial intelligence relative to the ones that are being destroyed? I really want high-paying or at least middle-class jobs that are available for everyone and not just very low-paying jobs that would require either wealth redistribution or some other policies to sort of address. So I think the jobs issue is one where I think a thoughtful approach to it, which highlights the issues of transitioning and the quality of jobs, is important, but getting past some of the over-the-top sensational.
Okay, job killer. Imad, what's yours?
In healthcare, it's a little different. I think it's clinical privacy. There's still folks that worry about pre-existing illness because of whatever the political sort of environment says about that. So if you eliminate that no one could be denied coverage based on pre-existing conditions, that'll probably make people a little bit more comfortable. Second, there are still potentially stigmas with certain diseases that folks are concerned about, whether they go for employment or anything like that. So if you say, we will introduce AI that will not only improve quality, but also guarantee your privacy.
Suzette, the one headline you wish you could eradicate.
I hate to be a copycat, but I'm going to be on the job fear-mongering as well.
Good one.
This is not a story that we haven't heard before in our nation, right? Something comes along that radically changes the way that we work, the way that we live, and creating fear about that it is not the best path forward. We know for a fact that we are creating more jobs in the data space, in the computational sciences spaces, in the design space, and 3D printing. You keep going on. We have more gaps than we can forecast that we think we're going to be able to fill. Right. So the concept, yes, there are some roles that are going to be automated, but not too many people, when I go and talk to them, really like entering data from one report to the next report. They get really excited by using algorithms to draw conclusions faster, to be able to act faster. Rather than spending 5 weeks looking at a set of data, being able to get a different set of outputs in 30 minutes and then make some decisions, that's actually what excites many of our federal workers about being able to do their job better. So the job fear is not only frustrating, it's distracting from where we should be spending our energy, is in how do we take the subject matter knowledge that people have and move it to things that still leverage that subject matter knowledge in important jobs now. That's reskilling, those are apprenticeships, that's also going back into our educational system and looking at different pathways and signaling, giving the demand signals, whether it's through grants or highlighting roles or other types of things of what is coming, and ensuring that we're having those conversations as young people, newly educated people, people looking for career changes, as they're making those types of decisions, so that we are creating our workforce of the future every single day, and that they expect that type of velocity will continue throughout the course of their career. So we're not only changing the dynamics of the work, but the expectations of how we continue to drive success and prosperity as a nation.
Well, they say millennials will have like six or seven. Yeah,
Gig economy,
so
right?
2 votes for job killers as the headline. I was going to mention just killers in general. For those of you who know Cyberdyne Systems, which is the giant AI program that Terminator movies covered that took over our planet. By the way, Terminator 7 is coming out in theaters November 2nd, just so you know. So you'll be able to see a return to Cyberdyne Systems once again. It's time for questions. And I think we have a fabulous panel that's ready. So let's start right here with some Q&A. Please, if I may, 3 things. Please say your name, the organization you choose to be affiliated with, and make sure it is a question.
Okay. Oh, you must be thinking about me. So it's Carl Pulzer, and I started a project called the Center on Capital and Social Equity. Looks at inequality and basically tries to help the bottom half. So my question is, has anybody done like a risk assessment of, now you're concerned about getting a bad name, and so where could these, like an assessment of where problems could occur, with misuse of AI, and then kind of proactively be on the lookout, like 2 examples. One is with financial services. I think that inducing consumers to take credit cards that can't afford, which is happening. They use AI to go, now they're going after very low income people. That's probably a bigger problem than fraud. So is anybody proactively doing anything about it? The other thing is international trade, strategic planning on manufacturing. There's a big debate about Huawei and 5G development. And the Chinese academic at another meeting that I just went to was surprised that the U.S. has no capacity to manufacture certain key parts in the system. That's a problem because of what they're, the Chinese could be implanting certain, AI devices, et cetera. So the question is, what are we doing to think ahead to prevent all this stuff, which is it's all over the place, in my opinion.
Big question. I'll direct it first to you, John, on that specific element of credit cards.
Yeah.
What's in your wallet, by the way, just so we all want to know. But this idea of credit extension and how I can focus on that. Then we'll ask the other folks to comment.
Yeah, so I'll be quick on it. With regards to fraud specifically, I believe, and you should check this, the House Financial Services Task Force on Artificial Intelligence had a hearing looking at bad uses of AI, trying to understand the issue. So at the very least in the financial services space, I'm aware of that going on.
Imad or Suzette, any reaction?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the other point on supply chain. There are many things going on to examine, understand, secure the supply chain. There's a set of legislation that was sponsored by Congress. There's administration efforts. There's a group of agencies who are very actively working together to understand both how we assess risk and how we take action on that. And some of those discussions and things are actually out for public comment. So that is a very active, intense set of discussions.
Imad?
I actually think of it as potentially helping the bottom half, because when you look at healthcare disparity, it does kind of occur that the lower half has less healthcare than the upper half. And if you remove that level of bias, you'll be able to cover more. And we have the best medical system in the world. We just happen to be very inefficient in the way that we administer it. Mm-hmm. And but we have great doctors, we have great centers, we have a great system. If AI can help us take out that, and if $1 trillion is waste, and you can add that $1 trillion back into the system for more care, you will cover everybody that needs health care in this country.
We had a hand over here, I think, earlier, or no? Yes, let's go way back there. Remember your name, organization, and a question.
Hi, my name is Adam Rusin with the Alliance for AI in Healthcare. I was curious from the panel.
What the hell are you doing here then?
I thought I was the only one here.
I'm here. I'm very excited to meet you. I was curious what you think is the top 2 policy issues facing the convergence of AI into the healthcare space.
Pithy? Thank you for your pithiness of your question. Top 2.
I would say single patient identifier. As a country, we need to have that ASAP. I can't believe we're the last country on the planet that does not have a single patient identifier. That means it's just one person, one number.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't have that. And the second one is, to some level, maybe mandate is a big word, but sort of a push for a lot of the private organizations to share data with interoperability, to not overuse that word, but you should not be company A and company B and company C, and all of you are using data to help your bottom line versus having to share data for the benefit of that person, for the benefit of the patient. One thing I will say, just what to do, it forces more cost into the system. So we have to build a longitudinal, because our company is so large and we touch about 150 to 170 people. Every time we touch someone, we have to search within our database to find who Imad, Rizik is, and make sure that's the real person, and then make sure we bring all the data to create that. That's a huge expense for every single organization to build that interoperability instead of creating one for the country.
Any thoughts on this? No.
Just
There you go.
simple artificial data silos, right? And there are many things that we could point to both inside and outside the government where we are spending time, money, and effort and delaying what actions we can take because we are trying to navigate across potentially, and I say potentially, some of them, privacy and some of the things we talked about earlier, those are the important reasons to have barriers. But sometimes we have legacy reasons and other reasons where those barriers are preventing the outcomes that we want to impact.
And we should just mimic what Twitter does, because there's no false followers on Twitter. They figured this all out, by the way, just so you know. Okay, right here, question, and then we'll come over to this side. I think we have some questions over here, too.
Imad, I know that you were saying...
Name, organization?
Oh, Hari Iyer,
AMA.
medical student at AMA, yeah. So I know that you were saying that you were talking a little bit about bias and algorithms, and I think that, we can agree that AI has the potential to, bring about personalized medicine and to really improve care. But the fact is, removing bias is not easy. We're in a country where the maternal mortality rate for black women is 3.5 times that of white women, and like Mark said, garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't have good data, if we have marginalized populations that aren't represented in clinical trials, then the data that the algorithms we're able to put out are not necessarily going to automatically eliminate bias, and that's not an easy process. And I think
And
it's
the
something
question is,
we need to address that really conscientiously. And I was wondering if you could reflect on that.
Yeah, he's actually got a very good point. So there was a question in there. I knew where he was going. So, you're just jumping out of it quickly. But I will tell you that if you get across the continuum all the ecosystem of healthcare, which is payers, providers, and pharmaceutical companies, to begin, and demographic data, to be able to get a longitudinal profile of a single, individual, your bias is going to go down significantly, considerably. But if you only include social data, but not retrospective data, if you only include claims data, you can have, that person has got a long history of claims and this, you will get more. The completeness, and at least we were talking about this at breakfast, we need an absolute minimum set of data to say, for us to be able to say we don't have bias, we need at least clinical data, financial data, and some demographic data. At least that much, and we should begin with that. And it's not hard. It really isn't that hard. In the state of healthcare and in the state of technology that we exist in right now, this is a self-induced situation for us.
It's funny, I invested in an AI company that does transcription and sentiment analysis, kind of a lie detector thing going on. And we need about 5,000 words. And below 5,000 words for somebody, you can completely misread what they are thinking or saying. But after 5,000, and then it's, to your point, it starts to asymptotically, or whatever the term is, it gets a lot better, a lot faster. And I think having a minimum data set is probably true for almost every single marketplace.
Correct.
When you think about it, I know it's true in financial services, probably true in what the government thinks people. Any questions in the middle or to the right-hand side of the room before we start to wrap up? Nothing? Going once, going twice, one line. There we go, right over there.
Good morning. My name is Joyce Hunter, and I'm the CEO of Vulcan Enterprises, and I'm the former Deputy CIO at the Department of Agriculture. My question is around going back to creating transparency with AI, and just throwing it out there. What do you think about applying AI to healthcare.gov?
Love it. I mean, I don't know, Suzette, if you want to take that on, but yeah, I absolutely believe you should have that. I think transparency could never be, as long as transparency coupled with security, those are the two things that you always have to have. And make sure that accessibility is very strong in terms of who could access what data. And we could do this right now. Like in our organization, certain roles cannot access certain other departments. I mean, you could write all these rules. We're that advanced right now. So absolutely transparency, as long as it's coupled with security.
Transparency, security. I'd add one other nuance on top of that. That is an active discussion at many federal agencies. Your previous agency being one of them. When you say transparency and you talk about the citizens that you're serving, from a government perspective, we also think about, we have to understand the way in which we do that, meaning the words that we choose, the channels that we choose, and how we explain that. We are serving different audiences, and it relates back to having the whole mindset of, serving our constituency, because there's a lot of data that is currently available. Finding it and understanding it is a challenge. So when we make a commitment to transparency, that also means that we have to meet the constituency in a place that information is consumable. That changes, with certain more tech-savvy, populations, data-driven. That's why we're trying to make some things where the data is transparent, so individuals can self-serve in a way. But that's an important conversation in the way that we drive transparency from a federal government perspective, is ensuring that we're doing it with the voice of the constituency as well.
But we just did it. I mean, Secretary of Health Alex Azar just kind of created transparency around drug pricing and around, you start to see, I don't know if you're seeing some of the commercials that say it's going to cost this much and your copay is going to be this much, which is really good. And also they're starting some transparency around services in hospitals. How much is a CAT scan here versus a CAT scan there? And they're giving you that level of transparency because before it didn't exist. So we can make steps, it doesn't have to be full open transparency, but at least these are good steps that the administration is doing right now.
Well, this has been a fabulous panel and a fabulous morning. So I want to thank everybody, but particularly thank Suzette, Imad, and John. Please join me in thanking them for their presence here tonight.
And thank you, Mark, for being a great moderator up here. Thank you, Mark. We're going to move quickly here. Representative Will Hurd is with us. Representative Hurd is from the 23rd District in Texas. He served in the House. He has served in the House for 3 consecutive terms. Personally, I'm sad to see that he's decided to not run next year, but I don't think we've seen or heard the last of Congressman Hurd going forward. He served as the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Subcommittee on Information Technology in the previous Congress. He now is on the Intelligence, a committee in the House along with Appropriations, 2 rather difficult committees, and one particularly in the current environment that we're dealing with. He worked on a white paper that I understand with Congressman Robin Kelly, discussing the effects of AI on our workforce and privacy, something that I wanted to get a little bit more into this morning. And He's been a long-time advocate of the American leadership in AI and other critical emergency technologies. First of all, thank you very much, Congressman, for your service, both in Congress and to the country. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to the Congressman.
Thanks, Bill. Now that I'm not running for re-election, I got a few things to get off my chest. Look, my goal is to stay involved in issues where there's that connection of technology and national security. I had the honor of being at an event, I think it was last year, where some NASA engineers were getting recognized for their work on Voyager 1. Voyager 1 was started a month after I was born. This was started in September of 1977. And when the engineers that designed Voyager 1, they thought it was going to last for 3 to 5 years. And we got most of our information about our solar system originally from Voyager 1. When I was in school, Pluto was a planet. Then it wasn't a planet. Now it's a planet again. I'm pro-Pluto being a planet. And it's still reporting back to us today, 42 years later. You know what the onboard memory of Voyager 1 was? 40 kilobytes. That's basically a Word document. We learned so much about our solar system from something whose onboard memory was 40 kilobytes. I tell that story because the technological change we're going to see in the next 30 years is going to make the last 30 years look insignificant. And American leadership in advanced technology has been an essential part of our nation's political and economic power since World War II. And unfortunately, we have entered an age where America's military and economic dominance is no longer guaranteed. And in this new age, leadership in advanced technology is going to determine who sets the rules of the road in a global economy and an international system. And if America loses its advantage in technology, it will have a devastating effect on our economy and our national security, and we can't let that happen. Technology in the wrong hands, as we all know, threatens our values and the very underpinnings of our free society. I tell people all the time, China is not using facial recognition to make it easier to buy groceries in the grocery store. They are developing it to continue to oppress their citizens. Right now, in Xinjiang province, the Chinese government has erected a technological surveillance state that has brought Orwell's 1984 into the 21st century. Hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs are being tracked daily for potential disloyalty, and more than 1 million have been arbitrarily detained in concentration camps. Silence in the West about China's use of technology to oppress an entire ethnic group only serves the interests of the Communist Party. It also ignores that Xinjiang is a testbed for surveillance state that the Communist Party wants to erect in the rest of China and export to other authoritarian regimes around the world. The nations choosing to invest in AI now are deciding the norms of the rest of the world, with or without U.S. leadership. Ethical dilemmas are going to arise, and the answers, as we all know, are not going to be clearly defined. On the battlefield, can a machine kill a human without a human making the decision? Can a machine kill another machine? Right? Should an algorithm decide how long someone is sentenced to prison or whether or not she or he gets bail? Should we abdicate leadership in this arena? If we do, there's going to be a vacuum, and authoritarian countries are going to put their spin on global warfare, privacy, and bias standards. So China has made it clear what their intentions are. They made it clear back in 2015 when it released a Made in China plan. And we all know by 2049, 100 years of communist rule in China, the Chinese want to be the world's leader in advanced technology and manufacturing. Many countries, both friends and adversaries, are making advances in AI. Chinese companies are trying to develop AI chips that surpass the capabilities of what American companies like NVIDIA, Qualcomm, and AMD can produce. Russia is preparing to release an AI strategy that focuses on research, workforce development, healthcare, and regulation, and builds on Russia's concentrated investments in military applications of AI. Allies like Japan, UK, and Germany have put out national AI strategies that are already guiding their research, regulation, and workforce development efforts. Here at home, I've been encouraged by our government's focus on AI. It includes the executive order on creating an American AI initiative across the executive branch. This is DoD's AI strategy, an updated government research and development strategic plan for AI, and the successful U.S. push for OECD's adoption of AI principles. But given the stakes of this challenge, we have to do more. And both, we have to do it on our own and in collaboration with our allies. We have to ensure that America leads in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other technologies that are going to define the course of this next century. And that's why the government should work on things like a national strategy to coordinate efforts across the government, academia, the private sector. And this is a strategy on advanced research, development, and adoption of AI. Creating a national strategy would better prioritize limited government resources and more rapidly advance American AI technology. I've been working on a national strategy for AI, and I've recently learned what my problem is, why we haven't been able to get it done. I didn't have my partner in crime, Robin Kelly, working with me. And so I talked with Robin last night. We're going to work together on developing a national strategy AI that we want to release, hopefully by May. And Bill, tell Grimet that I'm going to need BPC's help, and we're going to be making a formal request for BPC to help us in establishing this so that we can get a resolution out where Congress speaks on how the direction we should be going on with a national strategy in AI. And this strategy should include several key priorities. We have to dramatically increase the resources devoted to research and development. The government should set an example in leading the way in adopting AI, and this is going to save taxpayer dollars, but also make the government more efficient. It's going to be able to provide better digital-facing services. And the federal government and standards, we need to get rid of some of these onerous regulations that oftentimes get in the way of innovation. Instead, regulation should focus on addressing ethical issues, security and privacy concerns that are not covered by existing regulatory frameworks. People always ask me, can Congress do this? Now, I don't know how many members of Congress can explain what a neural network is, but they can tell you about how we should use something ethically. And so this is a topic that Congress is perfectly designed for. There's some laughs over there. Finally, these efforts should advance emerging technologies so that we have enough and train folks that can use these emerging technologies. We have to develop a workforce of tomorrow that is ready to tackle these new collar jobs. And the crux of the problem is simple. We have to prepare a workforce for disruptions not seen since the Industrial Revolution. And we have to train our kids for 21st century jobs and 22nd century jobs that don't even exist today. And to meet this challenge, we have to mobilize educational, government, and private sector resources at every level, from national programs to community colleges and elementary schools. For the current workforce, reskilling and continuous education and workforce development will be key to adapting our economy to these changes. Researchers in fields like AI and high demand, commanding seven-figure salaries around the globe. But right now, we don't have enough computer scientists or skilled technicians to compete. In my state, in Texas alone, there are 38,000 open computing jobs where the average salary is $93,000. That's more than twice the average for the state. Our educational system is not keeping up. Again, Texas graduated 3,500 students with a degree in computer science, and only, sad stat, only 19% of those were women. Solving this problem requires a computer science pipeline that focuses on fundamental skills that are necessary to master AI, and one of that is coding. Students who learn computer science in high school are 6 times more likely to major in it, and women are 10 times more likely. Also, 93% of parents want their children to go to a school that teaches computer science, but only 40% of our schools across this country teach it. Coding is the language of the future, and if our students can't speak it, they are going to be left behind. The only way to ensure a qualified talent pipeline is to introduce coding earlier, and we must start in middle school. I can make an argument that we should start in elementary school. That's why I'm proud of some work I've done to build these pipelines in my hometown of San Antonio. In addition to training our own, we should be streamlining legal immigration so that America continues to be the beneficiary of decades-long of brain drain from every other part of the world. Today, there's more than 1 million international students studying in the United States, including more than 360,000 from China. The best and brightest from around the world are being educated here, and we need an immigration system that allows more of them to stay, particularly in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, if the Chinese want to continue to steal our technology, how about we steal their engineers and scientists? Right? If you're an AI or a quantum programmer, you're going to get a visa. If you have parents or grandparents, let's get them one too, right? So that you can put those resources and that skill set here. Bottom line is, if we want to survive and thrive in this technological age, we have to place computer science at the top of our priority list when it comes to education. We can pull this off, and the challenge we face is not whether the next generation technology will be transformative and disruptive, but how will we manage the coming disruption? Will we let it overwhelm us? Will we be an unprepared government and leave the United States and our allies unable to keep up with our adversaries? Will we let our society fall behind and fail to harness the possibilities created by advanced technology, foregoing innovations that can improve the lives of tens of millions of people? Or will we meet this head on, as we have many times before, mobilize the resources of our nation, our society, our allies, to grasp the opportunities before us, to ensure that the United States remains the most important economy and innovation center of the world, so that we can ensure the values of the free world, not autocracies, guide the development of this technology. Put simply, we must take advantage of technology before it takes advantage of us. This is the fundamental challenge we face in the 21st century. I'm determined to help us rise to this occasion, and I'm glad that there's people like y'all that can be facilitated by the Bipartisan Policy Center to make sure that we address and tackle these concerns. So thank you for the time to the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thank you for all that you do for our country. God bless y'all, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I know you're on a fast track to get back to the Hill for some critical business, so we're waiting. If you can bear with us for just a few minutes, Congressman Bill Foster had left the Hill about 15 minutes ago, so he should be here any minute. I can't do a tap dance or anything up here, so please just relax, get a cup of coffee, but don't go away, because Congressman Foster will be here very shortly. If everybody could, that was quick. He was right on time. Congressman Foster has just arrived. Please find yourself back in your seat real quickly here. Thank you very much, Congressman. Congressman Foster is from represents the 11th District in Illinois. He's a scientist, a businessman. He serves on the Financial Services Committee Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, something, Congressman, we've been talking about all morning here with a number of experts. And some of the issues that task force is examining includes those things that we've been discussing this morning. on financial services, regulations, machine learning, and automation, and its impact on particularly jobs in financial service and overall. So thank you, Congressman. I know you're on a difficult schedule here, but we appreciate you taking the time to come down and speak to us. Thank you.
Happy to be here, and thank you all. You know, I'd sometimes introduce myself as saying that I represent 100% of the strategic reserve of physicists in the United States Congress. But I guess in this context, I'm probably 100% of the integrated circuit designers and AI programmers, actually. You know, when I couldn't stand it, a couple of government shutdowns ago, when a certain unnamed senator was holding the floor for a long, long time, and we were waiting for that, and I just said, okay, I've got to think about something else. I went and downloaded what's called TensorFlow, which is Google's open source AI engine, and worked through all of the tutorials on it. And I was sort of surprised because the algorithms are not very different than ones that we used back in the 1990s to classify particle physics interaction. I was a high energy particle physics. But the problem that people are running into, one of the many problems, is the same one we ran into. We found that if you tried to publish a paper saying that you have discovered a new subatomic particle because our neural network says so, it's a completely unacceptable, unpublishable result. And the same thing in financial services today. If you tell someone, I'm sorry, we've turned down your mortgage application because our neural network says so, it is an unacceptable answer. It's the problem that's called explainable AI. And this is a really crucial, one of the many things we're wrestling with on the Task Force on Artificial Intelligence in Financial Services. And there's no question that there'll be huge positive impacts of artificial intelligence. They just can make things much more efficient. For example, just scientific research. Right now, if you're looking for, say, a chemical catalyst, you would sit there and mix and test, large numbers of things and test them as catalysts. But what people are doing now is that they will test a handful of catalysts, tell their neural network to look at the properties of those and how well they work, and then the neural network will suggest where else to look. And so there have been recent papers published. I think one was Urbana-Champaign and possibly Argonne Lab, where you just had tremendous results from this. And so that's the sort of thing where excuse me, you don't have the problem of knowing if you have a good result, because the neural network predicts something, you test that prediction in the real world, and then you say it's fine. It's much tougher when you're turning down someone's mortgage application and they say, oh no, I know I would be able to pay this mortgage off, and you say, I'm sorry, our neural network says no, and you never get to test that prediction of the neural network. And so that we end up in the real world, and particularly the financial world, having a lot more complicated things. You mentioned that you were talking about the future of work and its impact there. That's something I've been worried about for a long, long time. And it's not actually a new problem. I entered Congress when I took the seat formerly occupied by Dennis Hastert, the Republican Speaker. And so I represented a lot of small, dying rural towns. And I spent a huge amount of time trying to get businesses to move back into these towns with not much success, frankly. And so I spent a lot of time after I lost in the Tea Party wave, I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what was going on in our economy, and realized that it was really that the farmers had been just the first victim of automation, basically. That when farming became automated, the number of farmers that you need dropped by a factor of 30. That means the number of small towns dropped by a factor of 30. And they've been living through that reality for 75 years. And so this is, this I believe is what's driving a lot of our politics these days. It's a problem that is very difficult to name by politicians, because it's not something that there are easy answers for. There's a very interesting analogy that some people talk about, which is the analogy between human labor and horse labor. You know, back 100 years ago, and at least in downtown Chicago, there was a very, very active spot market for horse labor. If you wanted to rent a horse for a week, there was a pretty well-defined price that was quoted in newspapers. And then what happened when automobiles and trucks came, the value of horse labor descended toward zero, and when it hit zero, the population of horses crashed by, or more than an order of magnitude. I think more than 2 orders of magnitude. And so this is, if you want a good future for horses, you have to decouple the actions of the free market to the future of horses. And that is one of the things that makes this whole discussion so tough. That if you're looking at a future where artificial intelligence is performing to such a level that humans have difficulty competing in anything having to do with the production and distribution of material goods, then you really have to face the fact that you must, if you want a healthy future for those humans, you must decouple, frankly, the free market to the actions of the free market to the future of mankind. And boy, is this a tough question to discuss politically. But I think it's really a logical necessity. Everyone's probably familiar with the science fiction story about one person who owns the robot factory, and no one can compete in any job with the robots built by the robots in his factory. The difficulty, of course, is the free market delivers all wealth to that one person, whether it's Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whoever it is, and then the economy stops. All right, and that's tough. If you view the economy and as sort of from a circuit designer's point of view, you'll say, okay, if we want a complete circuit where the money actually flows, there is not an alternative when all the money piles up at the top and then the economy stops. There's not an alternative from making a connection that redistributes the wealth that's piled up in the pocket of Elon Musk and redistribute it at the base of the pyramid, and then letting that money recirculate in the human-to-human economy. And this is and that will persist until such a point as someone buys a hamburger at a robotic McDonald's, and then the money will just flow to the top again. And you'll have to then redistribute it. So I don't believe, this is a lot of what's being talked about has to do with the universal basic income is sort of, one way to affect that redistribution, which I think as a circuit designer, I think is almost a necessity if you actually want a complete circuit in our economy where money actually flows. And this is this is tough. But I think it's actually, in a sort of funny way, this is getting easier to discuss politically. And the reason for that is that it is not just the farmers and the factory workers and the truck drivers that will be at risk. It is everyone. If you're not afraid for yourself, you're certainly afraid for your children. If you talk to teachers, their job is to train kids for jobs that'll be there 30 years from now. And what jobs will those be exactly? Especially in a world where we're eliminating not just the hands and strong backs of labor, but their minds. If you think of if your child comes to you and says, I want to be a translator, and then you say, well, why don't you have a look at Google Translate and see if you think that there's a real career in that. And it just goes on. And, it's moving upscale very rapidly, including financial services. There are big articles, I think the cover of The Economist in the last week or so talked about how AI is just taking over all the jobs in high-speed trading, which has been going on for quite a while. But it's going to have a real job impact, especially at the high end. To first order, anyone that spends their day staring at a screen will have their job at risk from AI. And that includes a lot of people who have received a whole lot of training and have enormous student debt. And I visited one of I'm on financial services, and visited the trading desk of one of the too big to fail banks not so long ago. And the trading desk consists not of people in the pit screaming anymore. It consists of people staring at big screens. And these are people getting $500,000 a year with master's degrees in finance. And so, I asked the guy who manages the place, what their plan was for AI. And the answer was that roughly half of those people they plan to replace within 5 years and 95% within a decade. And these are people, with master's degrees in finance and huge student debt. And so, my son, actually, he just made partner at Kirkland Ellis, and he's a patent lawyer, and he describes these very impressive, basically AIs that do search for prior art in patents. This is stuff that used to be the bread and butter for junior associates, and now, it's done, and they test it. They do side-by-side tests of young associates and AIs looking for prior art, and guess who wins? And so this is, I think when we realize that we're all in this together, I think that we may have a chance of having a reasonable discussion on this. And it's not going to be easy. I guess Representative Hurd has talked to you about the military applications. Any of you that doubt the implications of that, what you should do is just Google slaughter bots, the word slaughter, and then B-O-T-S, like robots. And there's a 7-minute video about the scenario where small drones with a chipset on them with facial recognition and a small explosive charge can be used for targeted assassination of individuals or groups using AI facial recognition technology. And the guy that appears at that, this is not a crackpot thing, the guy that appears at the end of that video is Stuart Russell, who wrote the book, literally, that people learn AI out of, and has been worried about that scenario for a long time. So this is going to transform the military, and one of my big worries is that we have all these legacy systems with very effective lobbying things that will advocate for continued building of legacy systems rather than the systems that will actually win the next war. And that's, so I think that's probably the biggest national security risk. Anyway, I'm happy to answer questions on most any of this stuff. I guess I'll say one last thing is one of the hearings that we had in our artificial intelligence task force, I sort of hijacked and redirected it toward secure digital ID. That the impact that artificial intelligence is having on identity is huge. And identity, if everyone's aware of these deep fakes, there was an instance not long ago where some employee of a company got what they thought was a phone call from their boss, and in fact it was an AI-generated synthesized voice telling them that they wanted to transfer a bunch of money to some account he'd never heard of. And now you're going to have deep fakes where you'll have a video of your boss ordering you to do something and in fact won't. And so that there'll be a huge attack on identity theft coming from AI. But I think there's also an important defense that will happen in the form of having basically government assistance providing citizens who want with a secure means of authenticating themselves online. If you look at the various proposals, how do you deal with fake news, fake posts on things? The missing element that many people point to are these so-called Blade Runner laws that say that any electronic communication that you receive, if it comes from a machine, has to lead by identifying itself as a machine. And so that, I think, I personally, and I think most of you, have no interest in getting any electronic communication from any entity that will not authenticate itself as an actual person that I can actually identify and take to court if they do something illegal. And so I think, what's necessary in that is for government to provide a secure means of authenticating yourself, as a specific human. And I think that is something that many countries are ahead of us. Notably Estonia and South Korea, both of which are countries that have been plagued by having fake citizens injected by their enemies, Russia and North Korea specifically. Anyway, so I think that there's been a real sea change in public attitudes toward that. We did an interesting political experiment just a couple months ago having to do with what has been for the last 23 years a ban on having a unique patient identifier for electronic health records. For the last 23 years, there's been an appropriations rider. Yeah, I see some people nodding in appreciation. For the last 23 years, it's been illegal to have electronic health record systems that have a unique patient identifier that works across all the systems. There was an appropriations rider put in by my former colleague, Ron Paul. And, this has been killing tens of thousands of Americans every year with mistakes from electronic health records. And so I got a Republican partner and had a very good bipartisan vote on the floor of the House a little more than a month ago to repeal this ban. And of course, like everything else, it's awaiting action in the Senate. But following that, we got just a tremendous letter of congratulations from I think 53 healthcare organizations and providers, because they understand the damage that this has done and the fact that it's actually time to have a sort of more mature attitude toward a means of digitally authenticating yourself. So anyway, I'm happy to answer questions if you have.
Questions, as Mike's
Yeah.
I'll go in front of all of Congress for the single patient identifier.
Thank you. No, it's the Senate we need, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever you need, but this
Thank
is
you.
going to slow us down and
Well, it has been. It has been killing. Estimates are tens of thousands of people every year, some in horrifying ways. The typical way is that it's a drug interaction, and so that one electronic health record system knows that you're allergic to this drug, but they don't access that one, and so they give you that drug. But there are more horrifying ways. One of them is a guy came into an emergency room, went into cardiac arrest. They pulled down the electronic health record for the wrong patient. That EHR had a do not resuscitate order, so they did not resuscitate this patient. And, that is the sort of thing that's been happening for these 23 years. It also, had this ban not been in place, that would have prevented doctor shopping for opioids, which is one of the huge drivers of the opioid crisis. That patients would go to 5 different doctors complaining of back pain to get opioids. And so that's another reason the ground has shifted on this, that when people realize that this would have prevented the opioid crisis.
You and your committee, particularly the way you present yourself today, seem awfully savvy on this. What's your sense of the other agencies, SEC, Treasury, and stuff like that, and their awareness and their forward thinking and some of the things you presented?
They have working groups that are very, very savvy. For example, things like the consolidated audit trail is something which is, first off, identification of the players. And the consolidated audit trail is a record of all trades, all bids and offers, and all trades. That's going to happen along with real-time stamping to look at, to be able for regulators to identify abusive trading. And the plan is very ambitious. Eventually, they plan to go, offshore, so that you can sit there and manipulate some price in the United States and then make a derivative bet off in London and collect your money off there. So unless the regulator knows it's the same entity manipulating the price here and making the derivative bets off there, they can't do it. And so there's a big international effort to do this. And a lot of that, this is happening at such an enormous rate that you need real-time AI to identify, these abuses in trading. And so I think I see little pockets of extreme competence in this area, and whether it's diffused into everywhere, I can't say.
Couple more questions quickly.
Congressman Foster, thank you for your remark. My name is Taka Riga. I'm GAO's first appointed chief data scientist. My question for you is, what role do you think oversight agencies such as the AG community, GAO, and other international organizations have in sort of an AI governance process?
AI governance is going to be tough. It's one of these things like biohacking, where the footprint of an AI, someone abusing AI, it's tiny. It's literally one genius. When I look at the progress in artificial intelligence, it reminds me a lot of theoretical physics, where there are 10,000 people that claim they're doing theoretical physics, and 50 or 100 people carry all the weight and make all the progress. And I get the feeling that AI is the same, that it's going to be driven by a handful of just autistic geniuses that are really good programmers and focus on a problem. And this is, so I think it's going to be hard to prove that, there isn't one of these geniuses somewhere in a way that, so that part of the governance is going to be really tough. I think the other part has to do with access to large data sets. One of my real concerns about AI is that AI will continue to drive the consolidation of digital businesses. That AI works much better if you have a big data set. That's an advantage to the big incumbent firms that already have access to this data. And unless you can find some way of giving a startup access to that same data, that startup doesn't have a chance to compete with an incumbent that already has the big data. And so, if you try to do the simple thing and just demand that the big incumbents turn over their data set to some small startup so it can have a chance, then you have the problem that if the small startup screws up and has a huge data breach, they can do tens of billions of dollars of damage, which will vastly exceed the capitalization of that startup. And so there's a huge problem having to do with data privacy. But a very interesting set of potential technology solutions there that go under the name of homomorphic cryptography. And what that means, it's a way that you can actually analyze a big data set without having access to it. You have access only to an encrypted version of it, which sounds like magic, but is actually starting to work in a number of areas. And so this may take away the strategic disadvantage that we have compared to China. China has this huge advantage. They don't care at all about privacy. And so, and we do, and that means our data sets are harder to get at. An AI researcher spends a lot of his time doing paperwork to get permission to safely access some data set, which isn't a problem in other countries. But if you have a way for the AI researcher to, look at thousands or millions of people's healthcare record without having direct access to it and still be able to do the same sort of deep data analytics, it could be a technological solution to the problem that's currently disadvantaging our country.
One last question, and then Congressman has to go.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Batal. I work for FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter. Thank you so much for your remarks and for your leadership in this space. To your mind, what are the most important discrete harms relating to the use of AI, whether they're ranging from privacy, security, disparate impacts, or of algorithmic bias in particular use cases, or something else that you've already seen in your work on the AI task force, and to which you think we should be attentive?
Well, I think it's the algorithmic bias. And this is not a new issue for financial services. We've been dealing with this for credit scores, which they're not neural networks. They're just, linear, and linear, brownie points and this sort of stuff. And so this is not a new problem, but it's caused incredible harm to people. And it's a very tough problem that causes you to think very deeply about what it means to be fair. And so let's say that right now all the banks are obeying rules about fair credit allocation that protect a number of protected classes, gender, race, and so on. And so as a result, they are foregoing profitable opportunities, to move their lending policies. Now, if you make there's some startup comes into existence that does deep data analytics on all of the population, they will identify the group of people that are actually profitable to be lent to that are not currently getting loans from the current banking system subject to all the fairness rules. And so they will come to me and say, oh, this is wonderful. I have a way to generate lower cost loans to a big class of people. Everyone will benefit, but some groups may benefit more than others. All right, and that's where it really sticks it to you. There's a famous question that they ask in, I guess, psychology classes to undergraduates to say, okay, here's the deal. Everyone in the class gets $100, but you only get $10. Do you take that deal or not? Okay, and no human being takes the deal, even though it's completely irrational. All right, you are $10 better off if you take the deal, but no one takes it. And so that you have to think deeply about fairness. If some startup says, okay, I have an algorithm that makes everyone better off, but whites benefit more than colored people, there's a problem there. And so we have to reevaluate all of those things. And now I'm getting the stage hook operating here. Anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Foster. And we stand ready to help you with your AI task force and Congressman Hurd with his grand national strategy. I'm Neil Newberger, Director of Health Innovation at BPC, and I have the high honor of closing this out and taking us to next steps. It strikes me as we're sitting here that among the issues we deal with here at BPC, that John and I and Bill and Collier, where are you, and Natalie and our team are really engaged in the low-hanging fruit among issues. You know, I've never met a member of Congress or in the administration who didn't think it was a good idea to e-enable all of the various vertical industries in this country and make us increasingly competitive. So compared to everything else that we deal with here at BPC, this is going to be really fun going forward. And we're going to need all of you, and as Mark Walsh said, and thank you, we know who you all are. You're going to be helping us as we delve into particular issues around finance and, in our case, healthcare and some other vertical interests and things. So with that, let's give all of our speakers, Lynn Parker and everybody, another round of applause. And thanks, Mark Walsh. Let me just say thanks again to all of you. Stay dry. Let's get it done, and go Nats. All right, thank you.